Welcome to Master of Science with host Professor James McCanney. The good professor's career spans 50 years as a university teacher, scientist, and engineer. Each week, he will explore the rapidly changing world of science as many long-held theories are crumbling under the weight of new data. He will cover the fields of geology, archaeology, meteorology, oceanography, space science, astronomy, cosmology, biological evolution, virology, energy, mathematics, and more. So please welcome the host of Master of Science, James McCanney.
Good evening, everybody. And tonight I'm going to postpone the discussion of the Betz limit again. But let me just explain this a little bit and why it's important. The wind energy industry uses this universally to determine the value or the efficiency, to be specific, to determine the efficiency of their wind turbines, which don't work. And so, at any rate, this is a physics discussion, rather esoteric topic, very important. But I want to conclude what I was talking about last week. The new direction that this country is going to take, it has a mandate from the populace, whether you like it or not. Don't get involved in that. It's not an issue of politics. This is where things are going. And so I did not get to talk about the issue of going to Mars. Okay, that's that's a broad, a very high expectation to try and get to Mars and plant the flag, which means putting humans there. I'm particularly of the opinion that putting humans someplace really doesn't make any sense until we have a lot of equipment there, put there by robotics. And so, at any rate, I want to talk about that tonight. But back to the Betz limit, just to give you a little bit of an idea. The Betz limit is a physics, is basically if you have a column of a non-compressible fluid like water or hydraulic fluid, let's say, for example, but typically the most commonly used is water. In a hydro dam, and you have a tube where the water is rushing down from this big reservoir, how much energy can you extract from that? And it's a kinetic energy transfer. In other words, you have to slow the water down. That kinetic energy then gets put into a turbine, which drives a generator, which creates electricity. It's very, very calculable. It's an amount of energy you can determine and depend on. So dams are very good in that respect. Kind of like, say, a coal dam. If you get a train load of coal in, you know how much energy you're going to produce with that coal. And it's very reliable, although it has other issues. Okay, so the Betz limit has to do with fluids. And they're using it incorrectly in the wind industry. And so it takes a bit of physics, talking about aerodynamics, the Bernoulli principle, which again is being misused. It's a lot of this stuff, and I just can't believe that engineering schools are teaching this as some kind of fact. But anyway, that I believe I'll be able to start on that next week. So a very interesting topic and very important. So, let me talk about, first of all, this week, the future of space. And first of all, start talking about the fact that we have, people are saying we have infinite reserves of petroleum, which is true. The whole world has near infinite amount of petroleum all over the place. It's not in the Mideast only. It's not in Venezuela only. It's not only in the tar sands of Canada. And how did it get there? It's because Earth has passed through the tail of large comets multiple times. We've gotten inundations of water from that, and I'll be talking about that in a little while, related to another topic, another crazy topic where people talk about water shooting out of the ground causing the Noah's flood. Absolutely an insane idea that somehow has gotten traction. But the oil on planet Earth has come from the Earth passing through the tail of comets. And you can see in the tails of comets the hydrocarbons. And they're baked all over the nucleus. When we get to see a comet nucleus, there's no water, snow, or ice. That's mythology. That's a fairy tale science from NASA. Thank you very much. But the oil on Earth is everywhere. It's under the oceans. The idea that it was created by fern forests is absolutely ludicrous. And the reason that got traction back in the early 1900s was so they could have oil shortages, planned oil shortages when there's no shortage of oil at all. And so, no, the United States does not have to import oil. The idea that we have to go someplace else and get oil, and the fact that we don't export oil, once again, the people that know, and clearly Trump has advisors who are telling him that there's vast amounts of oil reserves and natural gas in the United States. They're opening up the ports again. Remember, they closed the ports under Biden administration, shipping out natural gas. And so that is a resource that we have in the Appalachian Mountains and other reserves underground. Where does natural gas come from? It's part of the oil that over time natural gas is a byproduct, and it is trapped underground. And so when you go down, you drill down into the ground, originally natural gas was simply burned off, because when they went to an oil well, natural gas was one of the things that was naturally occurring. Okay, so first of all, the fact is, it is a fact, the United States has, in terms of the amount of oil and reserves and natural gas that we use, we have a near infinite amount of it. And we should be using it. We should not be paying this vast amount of money for oil. And the price of oil has to be controlled so that it's profitable to get it out of the ground so that businesses can make a profit. But it's not going to be the price of petroleum that we've been paying by a long shot. Gasoline in Venezuela is 5 cents a gallon. Gasoline in other South American countries where they produce locally and export is maybe 5 cents a gallon. And why are we paying $3, $4 for a gallon of gasoline? The amount of money you pay for a gallon of milk, but you're putting all this gasoline in your car, and it goes into the price of everything. So the first thing you have to do if you're going to cure inflation and the economy is to bring the cost of energy down. And that means using local energy, and until somebody comes along with a better plan, that's what's going to be used, because whether you like it or not, we built our society on the use of energy. And so, any rate, but the other issue is that we are burning native oxygen. We are burning native oxygen. That is, in other words, when a jet takes off, when the truck drives down the road, when you get in your SUV to drive up and down the road to go shopping or whatever you're doing, or take a trip across the country, whatever you're doing, you are burning native oxygen. And the Earth has a lot of it. You can imagine that every day all of this gasoline is being burned, 350 million gallons in the US alone. Worldwide, the coal that's being burned is using native oxygen, and it is affecting the level of oxygen, but people still repeat this crazy idea that somehow the Amazon jungle is replenishing oxygen into the planet. Well, it's absurd. How does the oxygen being created by the Amazon jungle get into the northern hemisphere during winter, or get into the southern hemisphere during winter when it's winter in the southern hemisphere? It's absolutely ludicrous. It's, you know, and if you took all the carbon dioxide produced in the Amazon jungle, maybe in 1920 it may have offset some of the burning going on of high energy content fuels like coal or gasoline or petroleum-based products, but not today, not by any stretch of the imagination. So we are using native oxygen. Also, I'm going to insert here that the idea that somehow you have to take carbon dioxide out of the air to make the earth a healthier place is absurd. The earth needs vast amounts of CO2, and here's what would happen if you doubled or tripled or multiplied by 10 the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. The plant life would flourish. And they've done this in greenhouses. You take a pine tree in this greenhouse and you take a pine tree in that greenhouse and you put double or triple or much more carbon dioxide in the one greenhouse, the plant's going to grow like crazy. The plant life today on planet Earth is being CO2 starved. The plants are starving to death from lack of CO2. And you have people who want to take it out of the atmosphere, and they are doing it. And nobody's stopping them. And this is insanity. And thousands, tens of thousands of PhD doctors from all branches of science have signed statements saying exactly that. The political football of global warming has been to raise the price of oil and energy and raise the price of water and give us the idea that on planet Earth we somehow have a water shortage when 3/4 of the surface of the world is covered with water and there's a water shortage. It's absurd. I mean, how do they convince us? But I'll be honest with you. If you can take a society and convince them that their greatest holiday of the year, which would be either Christmas or Easter, take your pick, that in Christmas there's a fat little man in a red suit that gives presents, and that's the main reason for the holiday, or for Easter, which is the resurrection of Christ, that you would you have a bunny that lays colored eggs that are painted, and the kids run around and find them in the yard. If you can convince a society of that, then you can convince them of anything. Believe me. I got a bridge to sell you. So anyway, back to the idea of energy. Yes, there is an issue of pollution, and we should not be burning the incredible amount of energy we're using. Simply put, people use far too much energy, and I'm in agreement with that. But the end result is that we built an economy, whether you like it or not, based on the use of petroleum. And if it doesn't keep flowing at the rate it's flowing today, a lot of people will die. A lot of people will die, simply put. So take your chances and with one or the other. Okay. Last week I talked about the state of colleges and that they've turned into businesses and they've actually killed the goose that laid the golden egg. And interestingly enough, I got an email from a listener who said, well, of course colleges have to be a business. How else could it be? And so I thought, okay, whoa, this is, I have to jump on this one, because for thousands of years, and this is indicative of people today, who are living today, especially younger people. I don't know what the age of the person that wrote this, but especially younger people don't understand that, 20, 30 years ago, not everybody had a nice house in the suburbs. Not everybody had a nice car. Not everybody, and 50 years ago, even worse. Most people in this country, they think that everything used to be just the same as it is today. But let's go talk about education. When you go back as far back as you want to go in education, I don't care if you go all the way back to the Greeks, or let's take from post year 0 of the current calendar, so the death of Christ, or AD, after the death of Christ, would be the current reckoning of the calendar. Education and the saving of information and the passing on of information and knowledge, whether you like it or not, has been done by people for free, and mainly in the Catholic Church. Other civilizations have come and gone, but like it or not, the majority of information that has been passed down to us today has been done so within the Catholic Church. When I grew up, I went to a private Catholic school. I went to kindergarten at the public school. That's the only public school I've gone to. Other than that, it's been private school education. But grade school, nuns. They didn't get paid, sorry. It wasn't a business. They had a very hard time struggling, and these women, the nuns, put a lot of effort. Believe me, I got a really, really, really good education from Dominican nuns. And God bless them, all of them, for the work they do and giving up their lives so that kids like me could get a real good education. And it was not a business, believe me. They did it completely out of dedication, and it was an order of teachers. That was their goal in life. And they would go through until they were old, they couldn't walk down the hall anymore, and they would go off to a place where they would die. That was not a business. When I went to college, I went to a private college taught by Christian Brothers. There again, they didn't get paid. They got some money so they could, like a little spending money. But it wasn't a job where they got paid like a professor today at a university making $200,000 a year. No, they did not make money. This was not a money-making proposition, and that's why my school, like I said last week, cost $1,200 tuition. The tuition was $1,200 a year, and my room and board was $1,200 a year. And there again, you had people who were basically volunteering their lives to make this happen. My classes, I had private professors too who were paid. They weren't paid a lot, a living wage, but they were not highly paid like universities are paying today. So if you go back to the Middle Ages and go way back, you find that the monasteries, where people went and dedicated their lives for free. When colleges in the 1960s, 70s, and it started to ramp up the 80s, the 90s, and on up to today, when colleges and universities turned it into a business and started realizing, hey, we can charge mom and dad, like I said, when Sis and Junior got to be 18, mom and dad have been paying on that house for 20 years. So they got a lot of equity. Well, guess what? They're going to sign on the line to get Junior and Sis a college education, and on the line for student loans or mortgage the house. And the colleges realized this. They said, wow, we can charge a lot of money for this education. So the prices went up, and it became a business. And they started realizing, wow, if we open up new avenues of study, we can definitely make a lot more money. So they opened up all kinds of avenues of new study, new degree names, etc., and it became a business. And now what's going on, they're too expensive. They have priced themselves out of business. I remember when I was a kid, the plumbers did that. I had friends whose dads were plumbers, and they raised their prices, and they were doing really good until one day, all of a sudden, plastic plumbing came along. People could fix their own tubes in their house, and all of a sudden the plumbers went out of business. They had priced themselves out of business, literally. And that's what happens with colleges and universities. Then they started selling online degrees, and that's where the end of the end came. And so I was quoting a NASA study, and what's NASA doing, creating studies like this since the year 2000, talking about basically what the government is doing surreptitiously and incognito behind the scenes to basically control you in society. And the one thing I wanted to mention last week, was that 25% of colleges and universities would be closed by the end of the 2025 school year because they've just priced themselves out of business. And so this listener writes in and says, well, how else could a college be but a business? Well, traditionally, like I said, the clergy, the men and women who gave their lives, dedicated their lives with what do you call it, in poverty, basically living in poverty. They gave their lives to teach so that people like me could get a good education. And so I value that. And so I'll just mention too that when I go to American Geophysical Union meetings, or when I go to places a lot of times to give a talk, or I don't do so much of that anymore because, but I paid my own way. I didn't work on a government grant, and that was very important to me in my career, to never take government money. And so I would go to American Geophysical Union meeting, my name tag would have my name, and then it would say independent scientist. And I was the only one there, and people would look at me, and they'd look, and the first thing they do when you're at one of these meetings is they come up and talk to you, and they look at your badge to see your affiliation. And especially these young green PhD students, they want to talk to me. And they go, independent scientist, what does that mean? And that means that I'm not associated with the government. I don't take government money. I pay for my own research. I pay for if I travel someplace or I'm on a field research project, I pay for my own way. And they go, how can you do that? That's impossible. You have to depend on the government for money if you're a scientist. And no, you don't. No, you don't. And that's why I've advanced more than whole agencies of the government, because they're locked into this political correctness baloney that they can't get out of. So scientists spend their whole life marching down the wrong road because they can't step out of the politically correct line of thought. Anyway, so yes, colleges used to be entities not for profit. They were used to be very much lean because the people who were teaching, and this is through like I say, through the Middle Ages, and then all of the universities, etc. And there were not that many, and then all of a sudden in the 1930s, the 40s, the 50s, these universities and colleges were built. And when they expanded and started basically turning it into a business, it was the beginning of the end. That's when they killed the goose that laid the golden egg, essentially, and destroyed education at the same time. And I wanted to add a little bit to this topic is because I have a master's degree in physics. It's in nuclear and solid state physics. And also I earned the title of professor when I was very young. I taught in a university, and that's, by the way, how I got hired when I was at Cornell. I got hired as a faculty member at Cornell with a master's degree, and you don't do that unless you have a serious experience. They realized that I would be an asset to the physics department, and that is why I was hired there. But most people today don't realize that, not through the history of the world, the PhD is a modern phenomena, especially the plethora, the absolute huge numbers of PhDs that have been given in the last, say, 30 years. That didn't exist before. When I went to college, there were 2 people that had PhDs in our physics department in the college, and 2 that did not. And they were all good teachers, but the 2 that did not, that had master's degree, were excellent, excellent teachers. You don't need a PhD, nor do you need a teacher's certificate to be a good teacher. Teaching is something, either you have it or you don't. And I don't care how many degrees or how many certificates or whatever you pile on top of it. A teacher is somebody that they just have a connection with the students, and they draw attention. The students go in that classroom and they're excited to learn because that person is at the front of the classroom. And so, yeah, the way it used to be, there were a lot of people in universities and colleges that had master's degree. A lot of them went on to continuing education, finally got a bigger degree, but that's not the way it was like 30, 40 years ago. There were a lot of people teaching university, college level that had master's degrees and very good teachers. So once again, people today don't realize that this is not how it's always been. That's one of the things that kind of drives me crazy about young people, is they don't know history. They don't know anything about the past. They don't know how things were in the past, and they judge everything through a lens of today. And anyway, that's a lot of problems of understanding today by today's youth or younger people is because they don't understand. I had friends when I grew up that lived in what were called basement houses. They would build a basement, put the first floor, literally the floor on there, put tar paper, and they lived in the basement till they could afford to build the house. You know, not everybody lived in a huge house in the suburbs as you see today. Kids don't understand that. Not everybody drove a BMW. You know, people don't understand how things were. When I grew up, we were poor. We didn't have money. My parents never imagined any of us would go to school, to university or advanced education. When I was little, my dad took me aside and he says, okay, you've got choice. Here are your choices: the Army, the Marines, the Air Force, or the Navy. Those are your choices, the career choices in life. They never imagined. And when I get out of high school, I get a full ride scholarship to go to university. They couldn't pay for that. They didn't contribute anything because they didn't have it. And so the idea that everything to the way you see it today is the way it always was is not true. It's simply not true, and it drives me crazy because kids today think that everybody lived in the suburbs. This goes back to the time George Washington was here. No, they don't understand. And not everybody was driving BMWs and SUVs up and down the road. No, it's not always been like that. Okay, this next topic, I'll tell you, I have to put my seatbelt on when I talk about this. Recently, again, now this is not a new topic, but this has gotten so much traction that I have to comment on it. And I've seen this come out in a number of from different angles. People are saying that the Noah's flood was a series of gushers coming out of the earth that was so intense that it flooded the earth up to a couple hundred feet, raised the ocean levels, and that this was Noah's flood. It drives me crazy because since this, nobody has ever been able to identify where these holes were. Now, the amount of water coming out of these holes would have been catastrophic rivers flowing for months to expel that amount of water. Never in the history of geology have we seen such a phenomenon. We have seen geysers where steam comes out, like at Yellowstone. We'll see these little geysers like Old Faithful every now and then. It used to be regular every hour or something. Now it's a little more irregular, but a little bit of a geyser coming out the earth. But to see vast amounts, we're talking rivers of water, like the equivalent of, say, the flood waters of the Mississippi River or the Nile River, shooting out of the ground and then flooding the entire planet. This is what they're saying, and they're saying this water is locked into a thing called ringwood. Ringwoodite, it's like a mineral that's in earth that supposedly traps water. They don't say how this becomes dislodged in the earth and all of a sudden this free water is there, and how it comes shooting out of holes in the ground all over the earth. There's no remnants of this. Like an asteroid hitting the earth, you would need a crater. For this to happen, you would need evidence of some kind where this water came out of the earth's surface, and there is none. We're talking within the last 10,000 years or something, estimate. So there would be some kind of physical geological record somewhere, and there isn't. But the bizarre part of this story is that they're equating it to Noah's flood. Now, let's take back the just very first onion layer on this story. That means that Noah would have known that on a certain date, all of this water was going to come gushing up out of the ground. And if you look at the Russell Crowe movie, that's what happens. What is it? It's not Ten Commandments. I don't know. Maybe it's Noah. I forget. But Russell Crowe makes this movie. And I saw Russell Crowe in an interview where he's going, yeah, this could happen. It was like, Russell, you live in Hollywood. You live in La La Dreamland. And you're not a geologist. And I don't know how much time you've spent in the field. I really like your movies. But excuse me, don't talk to me about science, let alone geology, let alone water coming up out of the earth in vast amounts enough to flood the entire earth. But let's go back to the concept that somehow Noah, in his somehow knew that on a certain date all his water was going to come shooting up out of the earth, and he builds an ark. Excuse me, it doesn't make any sense. If you believe that story, I got a bridge to sell you, buddy. Give me a couple $1 billion and I'll sell you the Brooklyn Bridge. It doesn't make any sense, and these people are serious about it. And I'm like, you can't be serious. How did Noah know that at a certain date all this water was going to come rushing up out of the earth? And there's another story about the Noah's flood which is equally daft. And that is that somehow there was a land bridge in the Mediterranean holding back this vast amount of water, and one day it broke and flooded the Mediterranean Ocean, and that was the Noah's flood. Well, the way the story comes down to us is it was 40 days and 40 nights of torrential rain. That means rain from above, rain, and of course, people have calculated that if you take all of the rain in the clouds in the world and it rained everywhere, all of the rain at once, it wouldn't be enough to create the Noah's flood. Maybe, a small amount of maybe an inch or so, whatever, but not enough. And there's no other source of water. So where did it come from? And the answer is from a comet. And this is when I see these people stating this, mainly out of ignorance, but there's all of these scientific questions along with abiotic oil. That's another concept that drives me crazy, that all of a sudden down deep in the earth hydrocarbons are joined together by pressure, and that's where oil comes from. Well, how did stuff move? There's no movement. If you go down in the earth 10 feet, there's no movement, boys and girls. There's no movement. And if something is in a chemical bond, like water connected to some mineral, it's not going to just release. It's just going to sit there. There's no way to release it, let alone gather into big bodies and then somehow magically come shooting up out of the ground. If there were such a thing, we would probably see it. We do see things like, for example, natural gas fires, where there's a case where I think it's up in the tundras of Russia, where it's starting to warm up, and these pockets of natural gas are catching on fire, and they create a crater. Well, that's due to the fact that the oil down in the ground is releasing this natural gas, and when maybe a lightning strike or something sets it off, and it sits there and burns, and that natural gas pocket just keeps burning and burning and burning. Yes, but that's not water shooting out of the ground 100 feet into the air, like the equivalent of a Mississippi River floodwater shooting out of the ground and flooding the world with 600 feet of water. Excuse me, boys and girls, but never, ever has anybody witnessed such a phenomenon. Excuse me, it just has never happened. So it's just a myth and a fairy tale. But I want to talk about something that is real for the Noah's flood explanation, and that is that Earth passed through the tail of a large comet. Take Comet Hale-Bopp, for example, which was one of the relatively large comets we've seen in modern history back in the mid-1990s. It was up there for a period of 6 years. If Earth would have passed through the tail of Comet Hale-Bopp, it would have taken us about 40 days and 40 nights, the estimated length of the Noah's flood in time. So and it's something that Noah would have known in advance. There would be a way of knowing that a comet is coming, its trajectory, its orbit is such that that we would be passing through the tail at a certain point in time in the future, and Noah would get his boys ready, building the ark and putting the animals in it, because they knew that at that point in time that there would be torrential rains. That makes sense, but you will never hear that in any of the main broadcasts or people being supported under the table that really don't know it. But when you see these stories come out and being broadcast, people say keep an open mind. Well, yeah, up to a certain point, please. Thank you very much. If it doesn't even pass the first layer of the peeling back the onion test, then don't keep promulgating these ideas. That's like the Christmas star being a planetary alignment. I've talked about that in this show. The planetary alignments happen all the time. The Christmas star was an event that was predicted thousands of years earlier and was something so unusual that when it appeared, the three wise men, the kings of three different nations, India, Persia, and what was the other one? Ethiopia, all saw it individually and started packing their bags and took probably a year-long trip to follow the star where they met on their way to Bethlehem. Remember, and they met and they came across Herod, who was very interested because his astrologers had seen it too. And so what was the Christmas star? It was a comet. They discovered it in the east, they followed it to the west. Those are properties of comets. It had a long tail, it was visible in the night sky, possibly visible in the daytime sky. And some people say, well, how come it's not registered in the Chinese texts, etc.? And the answer is that an item like that, because of its significance, would be kept from public records, very simply. And they do it today. Hale-Bopp was a great example. Here we have a planet forming in our solar system, and NASA was able to keep that information from the public for the entire time that comet was in the solar system. So it's done. Keeping information from the public is done all the time. That's the way things are done. It's not the exception, it's the rule. So back to Noah. The Noah's flood definitely was Earth passing through the tail of a comet. Very predictable. Unlike the water shooting up out of the ground, or unlike the flood of a land breach and flooding the Mediterranean. And by the way, if it was flooding the Mediterranean, and that's all it was, and Noah had prior knowledge of this, he wouldn't build an ark. He would just move his family up to the next hill and avoid the flood. And how would he know that land break was going to happen at a certain time and go around building an ark? So he could float up to the next hill? No, it doesn't make any sense at all. The Noah's flood was a worldwide flood. It's recorded in all societies all around the world as a torrential rain flood coming from above. And that's what would happen if we passed through the tail of a comet. Okay, so enough of that, but like I say, that idea that the water came shooting up out of the ground for the Noah's flood has raised its ugly little head again and requires some bit of sanity. It doesn't even pass the initial open the package smell test, let alone dig deeper and actually make sense out of it. Okay, on to the next topic. A listener wrote in, I like this, sometimes I get negative comments, sometimes I get very nice comments. And I'm sorry, this actually was a phone conversation I had with a listener who's, I think, been following me for a long time. But he said that my lecture last week was one of the best ones I ever did. And that is because I talked about physics being the laws of the universe. In other words, we are, as physicists, and as everybody is trying to get direction, but particularly as physicists, of which I'm one, are trying to discover the laws of the universe. And every time you discover what you think is a law, there might be modifications, there might be, well, what about this? But we're trying to put things in order. And I've spent a lifetime doing that as an independent scientist. But anyway, his comment was thanks for talking about this, but also mentioning, and so I want to add this also, in the spiritual realm, there are laws of the universe. And one of them is that, for example, do not do harm to other people. And or envy, or the 7 capital sins. All of those are kind of etched into our being, and the way they are there is very interesting. They asked Christ about this. They said, "How do we know about this?" And he goes, "All of this is written in your heart." That was his way of explaining it to simple people, and you'll know the truth when you hear it. And that's why today a lot of people are waking up to the truth of what's going on around them in many different ways. Talk radio, the internet has been a very good tool for that, where people like myself can talk and reach the public in vast numbers. But the comment was to also explain specifically that the laws of the spiritual laws of the universe are there also. And that's why, for example, criminals, or say politicians who are double speaking, that want to fool the public or whatever. They'll say something in front of their group of supporters, and then they say something completely different to the public. They're experts in doublespeak, and flim-flam is there's like a term. The snake oil salesman. It puts hair where you want it, takes it away from where you don't want it. They say anything to make a sale. And so anyway, if you take somebody like a criminal or a well-dressed politician or whatever, the reason they want to present themselves as wonderful people, and that's part of it, the wolf in sheep's clothing, because they know that if you perceive them as being a good person, then you'll think they're a good person and you won't suspect what they're really up to. And so the fact that they know that, and the fact that they follow that, says that in their own being, in their own heart, in their own mind, in their own psyche, they understand the laws, the spiritual laws of the universe. If there weren't any spiritual laws in the universe, then nobody would care. And there are people like that. They're pathological. They have pathological psychological syndromes where they don't feel anything. They don't feel any remorse for the damage they do to other people. Okay, so at any rate, there are laws, spiritual laws of the universe, which are inherent, and everybody sees them. Luckily in my life, I deal with a lot of people, a lot of business partners, a lot of other people who are honest, and they're hard workers, etc. And what they do is very honest. You always can predict. They're not going to jab you in the back or do something off the wall or try and overcharge you or try and whatever. They're very honest people, and you just expect that from them. But anyway, the comment is that there are spiritual laws in the universe, and man, by the way, is the only one that we are aware of that has this. Animals don't have a conscience. When an eagle eats a rabbit, it's not worried about, as far as that eagle is concerned, that's lunch. I'm sorry, I'm having lunch, and you're the rabbit, and I'm eating you. And throughout the animal kingdom, typically, that's the law of the jungle. But men are supposedly above that and try and live their lives in conjunction with the their environment, etc. And by the way, when I talk about oil and the use of oil, I am a tree hugger at heart. I would rather see less being used. I think we could have structured our economy very differently, but we didn't. And I'm not in charge of that. I'm sorry, I can't solve the world's problems. But the reality is, if the oil doesn't keep flowing at the rate it's flowing today, a lot of people are going to die. You know, it's just the way it is. And so, and what I do is I work behind the scenes with the wing generator, with purifying water, other things that I work on, and many other projects in the background to try and resolve these issues in the long term. But it's not going to happen overnight. Believe me, it's simply not. So we're stuck with the system we have, and so being pragmatic, we have to basically live with the system that's here and then try to change it. Just a quick comment here, and once again, kind of a reality check. There's a lot of people in the United States, around the world, who criticize the United States, but it's interesting because everybody wants to come to the United States and be like the United States and have the benefits of the United States. But where did all of this goodness come from that everybody is seeking to take part in? And the reality is when the Northern Europeans came to the United States, they basically came with nothing. They got off a ship, they had the clothes in their back, maybe a bag, they had nothing. And in 100 years, they built a technology-based civilization unlike we have seen in history. Maybe there were civilizations similar to this going way back that have been destroyed. And for certainly there were civilizations, possibly spacefaring civilizations. But in the history that we have today, it was about 100 years when the Northern Europeans and the Scandinavians and the Irish and hit, and these are, by the way, the Israelites. These are the groups, the remnants of the groups that came with Moses out of Egypt, and moved up into the Caucasian mountains in Russia. Started the Russia, Northern Europe, northern Spain, England, the original settlers of England, the Celts, and the Irish, who were descendants, a lot of them, of either the Celts or the Vikings, like my ancestors were Vikings. When these people came to the U.S., that's when all of this progress happened. And the point is that if you look at, say, the Spanish, who invaded South America and had vast resources at their disposal, or other people who have conquered other parts of the world, whether it was they had all of the same resources worldwide or in very large parts of the world, and they did not do what we did. They did not develop technological advanced societies where they can have automobiles and trains and airplanes and rocket ships that go into space, etc. They did not do that. When they had, in terms of time, they had centuries and centuries and centuries, and they did not do that. So what is it that is different about the Northern Europeans? When they came to the United States, they built basically what you see today. For better, for worse, you may agree with it, you may disagree with it, but that's reality. And so I don't know what to tell you. The bottom line is many civilizations throughout history had time, vast centuries and centuries and centuries, and did not develop advanced technological societies. They kept doing what they were doing, which is fine, okay, big deal. But when you look at the United States and the situation today with the highway systems, and yeah, the United States is not perfect. We can all find fault. I could go on all day finding fault with things in the United States and the military and all kinds of other things. But the end result is that if you look in Europe, it was Germany that did the vast amount of development. Other countries a little bit, but mainly Germany. And they were from the northern side of the Black Forest. Sorry, that's the way history is. So the point being that it was the Israelites who developed this technology. The Northern European, Caucasian people who came to the United States with nothing and developed what you see today. Okay, this last topic, very interesting, and I'll just try and summarize the question, although it's very complicated. Are there aliens? And this is a topic that's hot on people's minds. It's been on 60 Minutes. They're showing pilots have seen things on their radar they can't explain, whatever. None of that is evidence that amounts to a hill of beans. But the real question is, what is my opinion about the alien situation? Does the government have information? Oh, yeah, they have tons of information. They're never going to let it out. The idea that they're getting closer to disclosure, no. Believe me, the stuff that is at top secret level, and if any conversations have gone on between high-level officials or bank, the owners of the international banking community or whatever, believe me, they're not going to talk to you about it. What gives you a clue into this entire topic is that the CIA, which is the police force of the World Bank, has nothing to do with the United States. The police force of the World Bank had offices all over the world. It was under a program called Skywatch, now defunct. But they literally had offices all over the world. And the idea was that if you got visited by an alien, you would call up this office and they would go out and investigate, kind of like good buddies. But what they were really interested in is being the first one in line if anything happened. And that should be all you need to know to realize that the government was very, and I use that term loosely, the government, or the people in charge, let's say, had a big interest in what happened out there with the public. I've been a lead speaker at 2 of the International UFO Congresses in Laughlin, Nevada, 2003 and 2004. And so this is an annual event where people get together and talk about UFOs and alien spacecraft and abductions and types 1, 2, 3 contact, etc. Any topic, and these are the main people. So my topic was dealing with the issue. The first year was dealing with Planet X. The second year was dealing with my electromagnetic propulsion systems, something that I worked in professionally. And when I realized that outer space was electromagnetic, they had a lot of electromagnetic activity, something totally denied by NASA, then I went about understanding, well, if there are electromagnetic fields out there naturally occurring, you can use those to push against to create propulsion systems. And so that was something that in the early 1980s, I spent a good deal of time on the West Coast in California, looking for funding, talking to military groups. I was a speaker at closed military meetings, like one that's publicly available as the 19th International Electric Propulsion Conference, was held in Colorado Springs in the Broadmoor Hotel. And it was a closed military meeting for electric propulsion systems. People are designers, industry, military. And I was one of the speakers there. And that talk, I don't think the talk itself is available online, but my IEEE paper that resulted from that is online. You can see it as one of my published papers describing one of my electromagnetic propulsion systems that tells how flying saucers work, basically. And those were vetted by Tier 1 military physicists, both for funding and for viability and use in the military. And of course, those have never made it into the public domain. But you know, does that prove there are aliens? No, it proves that the technology that people were seeing is real, or has the potential to be real. I want to talk a little bit about going to the next star and interspatial travel and what it's like in our galaxy as germane to this topic. To go to the next star, which is, what, 4.5 light years away, what would it take and how long would it take to get there. And with a non-inertial propulsion system, inertial propulsion systems will never take us to another star, let alone very far in our own solar system. But non-inertial propulsion, electromagnetic propulsion systems are a viable way of moving between the stars. In fact, one of the talks I gave at the International UFO Congress was electric highways to the stars. That's a term that I coined. And the method of moving between stars is with a non-inertial propulsion system. Okay, so now if you can accelerate your spacecraft at 1 g, in other words, an Earth gravity equivalent, at 1 g, and you continue to do that continuously, something you cannot do with an inertial engine, whether it's nuclear or whatever, because you can't take that much mass along with you. That's the problem. So inertial propulsion systems do not work for interstellar travel. So it's a non-inertial propulsion system. And if you go at 1 g continuously, day and night, for about 2.5 years, I've given lectures on this, and then you decelerate at about the same rate, 1 g for 2.5 years, within about 10 years, you can get to the next star. Okay, and so anyway, the point is that moving between the stars is possible, and that's less time than it took the New Horizons spacecraft to get to Pluto within our own solar system. So it's very possible. Now, let's take a look at our galaxy. We live, our sun, our solar system, we are way, way out in the galaxy. We are out in the boondocks. And so it would be like, say, in the 1800s, somebody moves out to the prairie in the middle of nowhere and just can't imagine why nobody's visiting. You know, we live as far out in the boondocks in the galaxy as possible. We're way out there. When we look in farther towards the center part of our galaxy, there are star clusters, tens of thousands of stars in a cluster. And if there's life there, which I can pretty much guarantee you there is, those people, those beings, are not going to be able to even see us. We probably have a much better view of our galaxy because we're way out here. We don't have all the light from all of those tens of thousands of stars near us. They probably don't know that there's they don't know about the galaxy. They just see their own star cluster because there's light everywhere. Everywhere around them there's light, so that it's never dark there. And so they probably have interstellar travel, interplanetary travel, and but getting out to here is not an easy thing to do. Which brings up the point that when I see the Greys, when they talk about the Greys that have visited people, and a friend of mine, Whitley Strieber, wrote a book about, it's called Communion, talking about his events with the Greys, etc. My impression is that they are robots. They smell, the people that talk about them, and by the way, that's one of the main things you use as a confirmation that something is real, is that the smell, you cannot create a smell in your brain. You can create sound, you can create vision, you can create a lot of things, but smell is one of the things that you cannot imagine. And so the people talk about the smell and what the Greys smell like, and that to me says, okay, that's real. But when we see robots being built today that are human-like, they look like us, and so the Greys may be robots and be much easier to send a spacecraft to planet Earth to visit. And what are they looking for? They're looking for DNA. That's when they abduct people. What do they always want? They want DNA to take back. And so they're probably built in the likeness of their creators, the beings that live in these other planetary systems. That's my guess. I have personally never been visited, nor have I seen UFOs, what I would consider to be a UFO. I've never been abducted, or I've spent a lot of time in the woods. I've never seen things that I would identify as a UFO, and I would be, as a physicist, very tuned to all the things that could happen that would not be UFOs, like Venus or, atmospheric phenomena. but I've never personally had any encounters with UFO people, or aliens, as you might call them. At any rate, I'm running out of time here, but the point is that it's an open question, and I think it's one that requires a lot more study. But no, the government's not going to let you see any information that's top secret. Just not going to happen. So I'm out of time. We'll talk to you next week.
This has been Master of Science with host James McCanney. Join us each week as James will delve into historical figures such as Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and the great mathematicians as we explore the history of man, Earth, and our universe as you've never seen it before. Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern, right here on the Bold Brave TV network, powered by B2 Studios.